Good evening. I'm Kathy Lewis. We continue the conversation we started last week about the outcomes of the Virginia General Assembly session, the 2009 version thereof. We're happy to have back with us Delegate Glenn Oder, who represents the 94th District, serving Newport News and other areas of the Virginia Peninsula. State Senator John Miller is from the 1st Senatorial District on the Peninsula. Political science professor at CNU, Dr. Quentin Kidd, joins us as well, along with our good friend Daily Press reporter Kimball Payne, who has been a stalwart companion on this General Assembly journey. Thank you for that. Joined us many times over the years. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. Now, we have to reconvene where we left off last Friday night because you, Quentin Kidd, laid out a very controversial statement. Glenn Oder was just anxious to respond, and we ran out of time, so I promised that we would start there this week. So restate your premise, Dr. Kidd.
My premise, it's been so long ago I can't remember what my premise was, but my premise was that you know, the philosophical basis of the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party, and going back decades is for small government, a small tax base, empowering individuals, not empowering government. And that works really well when you're in opposition, because you can be critical of the things that government has to do and what the General Assembly, the legislature approves. It works. It's difficult, however, if you're in the majority. And so what I was arguing is that the General Assembly, the House of Delegates, has had a hard time since it's been under Republican control, figuring out how to be the party in power and be responsible and use government to solve problems that people want it to solve, and yet stay true to your philosophical foundation. And I think that's the heart of the trouble the Republican Party is having right now with its leadership, Jeff Fredericks, and others. And I think to a smaller extent, the Democratic leadership in the Senate, the Democratic majority in the Senate, had a little bit of trouble getting its feet under it this last term, figuring out that it was in the majority, how to operate as a majority party. So I think that, you know, summarizes it.
Challenge the premise, Delegate Oder.
Well, I understand what he's saying. I think the premise is a little bit more complicated than that, because clearly one of the things that you can look at is some of the older members of the House of Delegates that have been there for a long time also come from rural areas of the state. And so in addition to Republican and Democrat, you've also got rural and urban and suburban. Right. So there's a whole lot of issues that are going on. The professor, though, is exactly right. It is much easier to be in the minority party. You can throw bombs and you can let your caucus vote any way you want. You don't have to call any real team plays because you're not going to accomplish anything. When you're in the majority party and you call a play and you want something to pass, you've got to make sure that you can find the votes one way or the other. And so there's a struggle there to try and find. I mean, I'm not a big math major, but it takes 51 votes to pass anything in the House of Delegates. You got to find 51 votes.
John Miller, what do you think about this question?
I think Quentin was right. In 2008, when we convened with a Democratic majority in the Senate, it took a little while for Republicans to realize they weren't in control, and it took a little while for Democrats to realize they were in control. And so I think there was a couple of weeks there where we struggled and finally worked things out. But in the Senate, you're really governing with moderate folks on both sides of the party, and the consensus you're building is not so much Republican Democrat as it is trying to find a group of moderates that'll move the ball down the field.
One of the things I was very pleased to see that we had 2 sessions to go through in terms of these programs is that there was a lot to talk about in this session, and I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to walk through the issues around transportation, because both of you have been integrally involved in that, particularly as regards the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. You had a lot of effort that went into trying to come up with something that would work to add some.
Kathy, I'm as frustrated as every citizen in Hampton Roads that the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel has not been addressed. I'm as frustrated as they are that the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission didn't include the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel in the package of projects that to be done. Nobody anywhere in Hampton Roads understands how you can talk about a systemic approach to fixing transportation in Hampton Roads and not addressing the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. So last year I wrote a letter to the Secretary of Transportation, asked him to study it. I thought we would all meet in Richmond one day and roll some plans out and some magic markers and say, okay, this is what it would take, and would start a discussion. It was just mind-boggling. The Secretary of Transportation spent $400,000 studying the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. We've had 2 public hearings with massive presentations of the various options and so forth. And at the end of the day, what we're going to do with all this study information, there really was no plan because it was a $3 billion project and we just couldn't afford it. But let me say this. Yeah. So we put in a bill. I put in a bill that said, let's take those studies and let's give it out to the private industries and say, what can you do? You would not believe with the creativity that they came back to me and said, I'm so glad you put this bill in. We can do 2 lanes. We can do it without the big wide shoulders. We can do it without fixing all of the interstate interchanges from 564 to 664. It was unbelievable. We can do it for less than half of that $3.3 billion that the Secretary said. And so we put a bill in. I'm proud to say the bill passed the House, got all the way to the Senate. It passed the Senate Transportation Committee, got to the floor of the Senate. The Senate sent it back to Transportation after a time period when the Senate Transportation wasn't going to meet and the bill died in the Senate.
Senator John Miller, I know this was important to you as well.
It is, and I think we've got a couple issues here. One is that the MPO has refused
Metropolitan Planning Organization.
refused to put the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel on the list. I put in legislation to increase or to put members of the General Assembly on the MPO because I think there's frustration on both the MPO and the General Assembly's part. One, on the MPO thinks the General Assembly is trying to run the show, which we're not. On our part, we feel we're being presented with a bill, but we have no say in the projects that are going to be paid for. So hopefully those discussions are going to happen next month, and we will get at least 4 members of the General Assembly sitting on the MPO. And then I think the General Assembly will have some buy-in, which is much needed, and we'll be able to see the reasoning for why which projects are on and which projects are off.
And as you know, the contention is, in fact, I think it happened right here around this very table. The idea was, okay, if we can all get on board and support the 6 project as originally envisioned 10 years ago, and there is some question about whether it's time to go back and revisit those in the light of day here, let's add the HRBT, not replace it, any of the 6, but just add the HRBT expansion. There seemed to be a moment there when it looked like that was going to go forward. Is it fair to say that that spirit still exists if the money were there?
I would hope so. I would hope so. You know, Glenn and I both serve on a study committee that's looking at the transportation network of all of Hampton Roads, and after the first year of study, the takeaway was, what are the 2 things that you could do to improve congestion in Hampton Roads? One is increase capacity at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and the second one is build a 3rd crossing. I mean, those 2 things need to be done. The problem that we have is Norfolk has been opposed to increasing the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel unless it's just within the right-of-way, and that just means adding one tube. And the problem with one tube is that our commute is both ways, in the morning and in the afternoon, and the federal government will not allow a tunnel to have traffic going in opposite directions anymore. So that option doesn't seem to be a real option. So we've got to look for other alternatives.
Well, let me just say, and it goes back to the study that the Secretary did. They came back, they not only added on a lane, but they added 2 12-foot wide shoulders on either side of the road. So you actually ended up with 5 lanes going in one direction. If you take the 5 lanes coming in the other direction, you end up with a 10-lane interstate going at the harbor. Because I couldn't understand why.
Which was not your intention at all.
No, I couldn't understand why in the world were they wiping out so many houses over in Willoughby Spit. And that's why. And I said, why are you adding all of these lanes? And they said it's because facility upgrades. And I said, well, how did they do the hot lanes in Northern Virginia? I said, they did that up there. They did it in the right-of-way. They didn't add 12-foot lanes there. And they said, oh, well, we got a private contractor to do that with the PPTA, and they asked for waivers.
Public-private partnership.
Public-private partnership. I said, fine, I want waivers. I mean, there's just absolutely no reason to build a 10-lane interstate through Willoughby Spit.
Oh, no. And I'm not advocating I used to live in Willoughby Spit. I'm not advocating a 10-lane highway through it. I think, but you're painting like the Secretary is sitting there wanting to either pave over Norfolk or do nothing. And I think one of the problems is federal funding. I mean, you're talking about something, these are massive projects. We're talking about $12 billion worth of projects that increase it by about $1 million worth of interest a day. And to do that, you get about a 1 to 3 match with federal money. And to get federal money, you've got to have HOV lanes, bus lanes. I mean, there are a ton of requirements. And the idea that we could build, 2 lanes, it's not as simple. I mean, I'm just saying it's a complex project, and dropping 2 lanes out there isn't going to fix the problem and might not even get the federal money that we need to build these major projects. So, I mean, it's just a massive Rubik's Cube.
I don't know how you can say building 2 lanes isn't going to fix the problem. Because when I talked with...
2 lanes at the HRBT?
When When I talked to the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, they told me 2 lanes would improve, would take it from a level F transportation corridor to a level C transportation corridor, and they said that's as good as any transportation corridor in the state of Virginia. So
I find that. I mean,
well, but are you a transportation engineer? I mean,
no, listen, I'm not a transportation engineer, but 2 lanes at the HRBT is, I just don't think that's getting the job.
Well, one of the things I think if we look at what seems to be the emerging wisdom, which is that we're going to, if we are to solve this thing, and my gosh, it does seem intractable, it's got to be a piece of it has to be what we build, certainly. A piece of it has to be what we're able to do with public-private partnerships and tolls. And then another piece of it has to be how we change our behavior at the end of the day. You'd have to assume that if you were going to do an expansion of the HRBT, I think we all would agree that there's got to be some sort of bus commitment there or something to be able to get people back and forth.
You know, we've got to look 50 years down the road.
Right.
And how are we going to get from point A to point B in 50 years? Hopefully it's not in an automobile. We are not going to pave our way out of this situation. We've got to be thinking about light rail, mass transit, buses, and whatever to get people from the ocean front to Richmond and Washington. And so that's what we ought to be planning now. And trying to think that we're going to keep paving and paving and paving isn't going to make it. We need a new way of thinking, and it's got to involve mass transit.
You know, I would say to you, I've just been doing this little experiment where I've been riding the bus now and again whenever I can possibly do it, and the whenever I can possibly do it route is hard because you really have to be going between very populous areas at certain times of day and all the rest of it. But the one thing that is very clear to me is that from this experience is that so much of it is dependent on tunnel traffic. The bus I took the other morning was an hour and 10 minutes late because there was an accident in the tunnel. And as we were saying before we went on, you know, you can have the greatest plane in the world. If there's an accident in the tunnel and your buses are behind it, you know, you can have the greatest buses in the world. It's not going to help. So it does seem that there has to be some focus or attention around this idea of mass transit. And as you say, Senator Miller, you know, looking 50 years out, because that's how most major transportation projects are done, isn't it? With a look way beyond where we are now.
We are looking way down the road. I mean, that's why we created the 6 projects, and I'm just saying we need to add the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel to it. But the issue for the general public is, and I mean, I'm on the ballot every 2 years. I'm out there with the public. And they want solutions now. They love it when you talk about 50 years. They love it when you talk about mass transit. But it's so pie in the sky, nobody can put their arms around it.
So what do we do now?
What they know is they get stuck every single day.
Without doubt. So what do we do now?
Let me just tell you, private industry was excited about my bill, House Bill 2079, which added 2 lanes to the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. They were excited about it. They said they could do it in the existing right-of-way. We can't do more than 2 lanes unless we get Norfolk to buy it. Norfolk passed a resolution. The entire city council voted, we're opposed to anything at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. I'm hoping that it was because they were afraid that we were going to be taking houses in Norfolk. I understand why elected leaders wouldn't want to lose houses over in Willoughby Spit. But the point of the matter is that we've got to do something. We all know that the existing tunnel is 50 years old. Sooner or later, that's going to need major renovations. Wouldn't it be nice if we at least had 2 more lanes? And, you know, and we don't get stuck at traffic in Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel all day long. It's at peak times. 2 more lanes would do an enormous amount to resolve those peak loads.
I think my biggest problem is it's a $12 billion wish list, just for Hampton Roads.
Right.
I mean, we're not even talking about Northern Virginia.
And that's increased from the $6 billion that it was.
It's way worse in Northern. I mean, I drive back to Baltimore, and I don't even go near D.C. I'll take the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel before I go near D.C. And we've got $12 billion. So when you've got something like that, and the projects aren't really changing because the decision makers aren't really willing to reopen that argument, and so you're getting further and further from reality.
So when we just saw a driver behavior. He would prefer to pay a toll, the highest toll in the nation, in order to avoid congestion, and you know, and so
you got it, because I'd rather $14 is worth 9 hours of my life.
Sure, and we'll soon see whether that theory works with the Jordan Bridge and the way that they're talking about approaching that, which is replacing it in a public-private partnership, replacing a 75-cent toll with a $2 toll each way, in exchange for getting that bridge online in 2010. That's going to be interesting to see how that whole thing works out and whether people are willing to do that. I mean, I guess we'll have an opportunity to check it out soon.
But you asked what we could do
yes.
right now. One of the things we ought to do is make 460 a freight corridor and 64 a tourist corridor, and make sure that all the trucks to and from the port go and use 460 and get all the containers over on the Portsmouth side, and let them pick up their containers and go up 460. And that would, for every truck you get out of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, you can stick 3 more cars in, and you immediately increase the capacity of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and you spend no money.
It's a federal highway. You can't restrict trucks off a federal highway. Now, if you could probably approach your state senators and see if they couldn't get federal law changed. But I asked that question years ago, and I was told it's a federal highway. It's an federal issue. You can't change it.
You can do, I would think, some sort of incentives or something. You come over here and
an idea is brewing. We'll see where it goes. Speaking of ports, though, there is this very interesting proposal to privatize port operations in some way. I think I've said that appropriately. What do you make of that? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's, these two guys probably have more information about it than any of us do. But it's...
But philosophically, though, where are you on it?
Well, you know, it's the most valuable economic resource I think Hampton Roads has are those ports. And so I think in order to move forward, it would have to really be economically beneficial, A, to Hampton Roads, but B, to the state. And I just don't think we know the answer to that yet.
But it's awfully tempting when you look at the amount of money that they're talking about here for a cash-strapped state.
But the problem is, this what's the name of the company? Countrywide Real Estate, I think, in Chicago, has dangled what seems to be a large amount of money in front of the state.
$8.9 billion.
$8.9 billion. But over a 60-year period, is it really a large amount of money, and will it solve problems that are going to occur 40 or 50 years out?
What do you think?
When you look at the economic situation in the budget that we have, and the one we've just gone through, $8.9 billion is enticing.
Pretty good, huh?
And there are a lot of people say, well, let's grab the money and run. Governor Gilmore, back when the tobacco settlement came along, argued for a immediate one-time lump sum taking of the cash because there was some uncertainty as whether the tobacco money would continue to be available in the out years. It has been. We've made millions more doing it, taking it every year than grabbing that one lump sum cash payment. You know, this is, as Quentin said, our best economic engine, and turning it over for what seems like a good amount of money right now, I don't know that it makes all that amount of sense to me right at this point.
I don't know any more than anybody else does what we've read in the papers and so forth. So I would say this, that there is a policy change that's being made, and we're seeing it in Virginia. You mentioned the Jordan Bridge a few minutes ago. I mentioned the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. There's if state government wanted to build a building today, it would have to be done under a public-private partnership arrangement. If state government wanted to build a road, it had to be done under a public-private partnership arrangement, basically with a toll. I mean,
because there's just no money.
There's no money for the type of infrastructure improvements that we have. I couldn't agree more that the port is one of our greatest assets, maybe in the state. It's an asset which benefits the entire East Coast, of the country. And the problem is the question you have to ask is it operating on all 8 cylinders? And if the potential is there to turn this 4-cylinder engine into an 8-cylinder engine, if the potential is there, but the state doesn't have the capacity to make the investment in it, and somebody wants to come along and they want to make the investment in it so that it now becomes an 8-cylinder engine and everybody benefits from it, there's more tax revenue that gets generated. The College of William Mary said that the current port revenue is $1.2 billion a year that comes in just in taxes to the state of Virginia. If we could make that engine run even better, more money would come into the state. So the policy for the state of Virginia is going towards a public-private partnership era. There's an opportunity here to expand the capacity of the port, and I would say that the public-private partnership proposal is a very, very open process, and I would expect at least 2 more proposals, is what I'm reading in the paper. There'll be 2 more proposals, so it'd be very interesting, especially in an election year, and especially in a gubernatorial election year, to see how this all gets debated out. It's not a short-term answer. I mean, it's going to take a while to resolve this.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a really complex issue because you've got this sort of murky relationship that Virginia International Terminals has, and there's the operating arm and the development arm and the public arm. But I think my biggest problem with the 4-cylinder to 8-cylinder is you're tossing the keys to somebody else, which means that 8-cylinder may be driving out with some other executive. I mean, you're dealing with something that is an asset to Virginia. This stacked with Dulles International Airport are 2 of the biggest drivers of wealth in the state of Virginia, and I think the state has to be very conscious and very careful of why are they willing to pay so much for such a long-term thing. Are we really getting the benefit here, or are we getting sold a nice big upfront chunk of change and then realize, 15 years down the line, we could be pumping, $100 million worth of tax revenue just on new developments out of there. I mean,
do all of you fundamentally agree, though, with Glenn Oder's point that we are in the era of public-private partnerships when it comes to improvements in the Commonwealth and new projects?
It's the only place the money is.
Yeah, the problem is nationwide, Virginia is just a part of it. The last and the first really great infrastructure growth that we went through was in the 50s and 60s, and we haven't really done much since then. We've sort of kept up maintenance. But that infrastructure built in the 50s and 60s is crumbling, and there's huge need to renew it and expand it at a time when across the country there's been a real aversion to tax increases, to growing revenue. And so the two of those collide, and you've got to come up with the money somewhere. And so you've got a private company that will come along and say, we'll work with the state. We have the revenue. We have the money to do it. We'll work with the state and do it.
We've only got a few minutes left, and before we leave, it has absolutely nothing to do with public-private partnerships, but we were talking before we started the program about something I want to make sure that you're in on here. Delegate Glenn Oder, you were saying that you talked with VDOT about the lights on the highway. Sure. When it says, there were the signs on the highway, I should say, when it says 5-mile backup, and this is a chronic frustration for people throughout the region, that it'll say 5-mile backup, you'll get up there and you'll breeze through, and you can't quite figure that out. Now, you had an idea that they might be able to take a look at to fix that.
It's not my intention as a legislator to micromanage VDOT, but
sure.
People ask me so many questions that I get involved. And so I went to VDOT and I met with them and had a 3-hour baptism in how they manage the roads and so forth. And I have to tell the public that the cameras that they have and the way they orchestrate it and what they do, if Captain Kirk had it on the Starship Enterprise, the Klingons wouldn't have had a prayer. But the problem is that nobody believes the signs.
Right.
And I had to explain that to them. And so the conclusion that I came to was I said, time, date, the signs. Put on there that at 3 o'clock in the
there's
afternoon,
a 5-mile backup.
There's a 5-mile backup. That way when somebody sees the sign, they know that if it's 5 minutes after 3, I'm not going that direction. Conversely, if it's 7 o'clock at night and it still says 3 o'clock, you know it hadn't been updated. And I think people would find out that VDOT is updating the signs.
Mm-hmm. And at least you would have the opportunity to make a decision that was more timely in that regard.
Well, you have no idea how that's going to work, but I mean, I think Glenn has shown that questions like this, I mean, he's gotten some things fixed. You look at the HOV lanes on the south side. I mean, that was open for what, 90 minutes. It was they allowed an hour and a half for the HOV lanes on 64 on the south side to clear out. You safety first, granted, but if you can clear those out in 15 minutes and open them back the other way, well, Glenn asked enough questions and it got done. I mean, I'm just saying that sometimes some of these questions, I have no idea if they can timestamp these, but sometimes you get little bits and pieces like that.
You just have to ask the questions and see. And that's what's great about talking to your constituents, is you get to hear all these interesting things that are on people's minds.
They're not free to share their thoughts or ideas,
Indeed,
which
they
is a
are.
good thing.
That's a very good thing. I want to thank all of you for being with us for now 2 weeks in a row to talk about the issues from the General Assembly session, and we'll continue to keep shining the light on it and see. Well, I'd love to have you here, so come on back anytime you can. And I'll be back in a moment with a look at your letters. We heard from a mother and a son about our recent show on the yoga classes they're taking at Granby High School. It's a free program that originated with an art teacher and was nurtured by great leadership from the PE department and the principal. Mother and son agree on their enthusiasm for the program, but there is a bit of the devil in these details. From Mom: my son Jacob is in the program and he loves it. I never have to remind him to bring his gym uniform to school, and he always dresses out. How many parents can say that about their teenagers? He is in the IB program, and I think it really helps him manage stress and get some physical activity. And from son Jacob: I am ecstatic to get the chance to participate in this program during school and enjoy getting to participate in multiple different courses. However, Mom, I don't always dress out. I kind of haven't dressed out in a few months. All righty then. From student Alex Bateman, I play soccer and I enjoy participating in PE, but I have noticed that a lot of the people in my class don't participate. Maybe next year in my sophomore year, those people are able to have this opportunity. And from student Miranda Main, I think the Granby Yoga program is a really good idea. I would like to be in it when I get into the 10th grade. I have a lot of stress, so I think it's a really good idea and could possibly make the school day much easier. Well, that is it for us on this edition of What Matters. Thanks for all of your calls and letters. Here's a look at what's coming up. We ride the bus to see if Hampton Roads can develop a transportation system that will really let us park some of our cars. And we will check in with our expanding editorial roundtable for their take on the news. Plus, Hollywood in Hampton Roads. We'll see how the region fares as a film location and in the national spotlight. We have some other terrific shows in the works as well. In fact, if you'd like to know more about what's coming up, we'll be very glad to send you an e-bit to let you know what we have in the works. You can sign up at our website, which is whatmatters.tv. You can also visit us on Facebook. Yes, we're there too. Email is a great way to stay in touch at whatmatters@whro.org. And you can also write to us at 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk, Virginia, 23508, or call us on the phone, 889-9425. Any way you choose, we're always glad to hear from you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another look at What Matters.